Okay, this is contemporary math, section 5B. The first, we're going to talk about the 8 guidelines for evaluating a statistical study. The very first guideline is to get a big picture view of the study. In other words, what was the goal? What population was under study? And was the study observational or experimental? Number 2 is consider the source. Remember that statistical studies are supposed to be objective. So if you see a statistical study looking at if tobacco is harmful for your health and the source of the statistical study is a tobacco company, yeah, you might want to consider whether that study is reliable. 3 is look for bias in the sample. So selection bias is when researchers select their sample in a way that would make it unrepresentative of the population. And then participation bias. This usually happens whenever people choose to participate, like a self-selected or voluntary survey. Remember that most people that choose to participate in a survey usually have some pretty strong feelings that they'd like to share. So that would be, if you have a choice of whether to do the survey or not, that's participation bias. The 4th guideline is look for problems in defining or measuring the variables of interest. For instance, there was a example in the book where it said that law enforcement stops only 10% of illegal drugs entering the US. Well, I mean, think about that statement. How do they know? How in the world do you know that you're missing 90% of the illicit drugs that come into this country if you're not catching them? You know what I mean? I mean, there's no way to know that statement to be true. The 5th guideline is to be aware of confounding variables, which are variables not intended to be part of the study. The example the book did, let's say you want to do a study to see if radon gas causes lung cancer. So you choose 2 populations, sample populations, one from Colorado, where the radon levels are very high, and one from Hong Kong, where the radon levels are pretty low. And you find out that the lung cancer rates are about the same in both places. Is it fair to assume that radon is not a significant cause of lung cancer? Well, of course not, because they didn't even look at smoking, which, by the way, the percent of population that smokes in Hong Kong is way higher than the percentage of population that smokes in Colorado. So, yeah, beware of confounding variables. The 6th guideline is to consider the setting and wording in surveys. Look out for problems with the setting or wording that might produce inaccurate or dishonest responses. For instance, let's say you're doing a survey on how people feel about abortion. If you were to word a question like, do you feel that how do you feel about abortion? In other words, murdering our babies. So, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question, right? And so you want to look out for those. People are more likely to choose the item listed first in a survey question, and dishonesty is more likely when the survey concerns some sensitive subjects. For example, do you cheat on your taxes? Do you cheat on your spouse? Those are pretty sensitive subjects, and people are more liable to lie on those kind of questions. Okay, the 7th guideline is check that results are presented fairly. Excuse me. A statistical study may be misinterpreted in graphs or concluding statements. Reporters misinterpret the results of a study because it makes the story more spectacular. They use misleading graphs, which is pretty common. And you want to look for inconsistencies between interpretation of a study in pictures and words and any actual data that was given. And then the 8th guideline is just to stand back and consider the conclusions. First of all, did the study achieve its goals? Do the conclusions make sense? Can you rule out alternative explanations for the results? And do the conclusions have practical significance? In other words, yeah, this is a valid conclusion, but it doesn't really have any significance on, the way I live my life. And that is it for the 8 guidelines. Your assignment is the quick quiz 5B on page 316.